Samyak back again. My question is, do you think that in today's world, as reality is, democracy is one of the biggest seeders of corruption and crime? Because when there is power, there is money required to win elections. Because and the second question is that, do you think there's any other solution to this vicious cycle? Because just this morning we had Anna Hazare, who's a crusader of anti-corruption, speak. But reality is that 70% of the masses that were supporting him on the streets paid a bribe and will continue to pay a bribe to get out and get in or whatever they want.
Well, democracy works if the institutions are strong. And I mean, it sounds largely critical of the United States, but the institutions have been strong. In the United States, the big conglomerates, if they fail, they are known to manipulate or cheat. They are sent to jail. In our societies, if these big conglomerates cheat, they are given additional promotion and a bailout. So there is therefore a problem to deal with. I'm not here to defend excesses of any society, but institutions must remain strong. And institutions, by institutions I mean judiciary, which must be independent, a political system, a political leadership that might be held accountable. And I think this is an issue which fortunately, there is also this trend. There's a growing voice and concern, even in India now, you know, questioning legitimacy of governments, not only in terms of elections or electoral process, in terms of honoring their commitment to the people. So it remains to be a challenge. It is really unfortunate. That's why I have a strong view on this. You know, the great democracies in the region, India and Indonesia, which I strongly support, but my predicament is, how do we deal with these countries when it's too much associated with endemic corruption and abject poverty? You can excuse leaders for a decade, but you can't go on giving excuses after half a century of rule and you still have abject poverty in your midst. This is a crime by itself, the failure of governance.
True, absolutely. Second question, I think down the line, yeah.
I was wondering about how you view the role of the internet in a democracy going forward, because as we've seen over the last year and a half, and especially in India, the online business, the internet has been the challenge to the internet from democratically elected governments as well. And it's essentially a state of anarchy on the internet. So how do you see this going forward?
Anwar tweets, by the way.
Yeah, I do tweet. And my last tweet was that I regret the fact that I was not able to be with Kareena Kapoor. Now, in 1998, when I was in prison, in the absence of free media, Malaysia registers the highest exponential growth of internet users in the world, which means that people do opt for an alternative media. The limitation is because the extent of internet penetration does not go beyond urban, suburban areas, and particularly in the rural heartland, which will depend solely on a government-controlled media. The Arab Spring has proven a point, although I believe that this has been too exaggerated. I mean, it's true, internet, social network did play and continue to play a major role. But some of the traditional institutions, the mosque committees, the village panchayat of a sort, do have some influence. I don't believe that they should be underestimated. But then we will have to work, I mean, to my mind, particularly in a country where, a system where I come from, internet is so critical. Social network becomes the weapon, the media weapon, although it is still, to my mind, limited. But we need to have some sort of of course, the debate of a control. I have never supported the idea of censorship, because censorship will have some basis, yes, if you say excessive pornography or blasphemy or inciting racial or religious riots, yes, but once you go along that path, we'll have enough political leaders and to extend that argument. I say this because you have exported this horrible draconian law, the Internal Security Act, which we adopted in 1960 against militant communists, only to be used by people like me, against people like me, you see. So all in the name of public order and security. So it's always a danger. So we will have to draw the line here between the need to have order and the excesses by the political masters.
Thank you. Third question. Sorry, yes, Mr. Gharikan. Mr. Gharikan, third, and then fourth there. Is there anyone here? No, first here, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ibrahim. One of your great admirers is asking you this question now. One has observed last few years this phenomenon of increasing radicalization in society. In all religions it is happening. And since one hears the most about Muslim societies, one sees this gradual phenomenon of more and more extremism taking hold. If I'm not mistaken, even in Malaysia, I think, Malaysia, which used to be such a secular country, I think there is this trend towards more Islamization or more radicalization. And we see in this Arab Spring also, all the parties, movements which have gained the upper hand now, following the so-called Spring, they are all Islamic movements, like the Brotherhood of the Salafists in Cairo and Egypt and so on. What do you think is the reason for that, and should that be a cause for concern, not only to people like you who are genuine Democrats and secular people, but also to the rest of us in the world? Should that be a cause for concern, and what can one do about it?
MG has written extensively on this issue of reason against radicalism, against extremist elements. I remember a recent book by Al Gore expressing his concern about the trend in the United States, assault on reason. And I think essentially, to my mind, empowerment, democracy means empowerment. Empowerment requires not only political but economic, but also cultural empowerment. The level of education, of awareness on various issues which we have to deal with. Now, I don't share necessarily that the development in the Arab world, post-Arab Spring, is of concern. Even the so-called Islamists have taken a much more guarded, proper sort of position vis-a-vis the issue of freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, rule of law, and I think these parameters must be clearly drawn. I coordinate a coalition of parties in Malaysia between the ethnic-based, Chinese ethnic Democratic Action Party, the Justice Party, led by Aziza, and also the Islamic Party. Now, one calls itself secular, the other calls it Islamic. But I think other than being dragged by these slogans, let us now spell out in detail what we mean by the rule of law, by freedom of conscience, by a market economy with strong affirmative action policies and distributive principles of distributive justice. How do you deal with multi-ethnic, multi-religious societies and issues of marginalization and problem confronted by minorities? And I think that is, to my mind, more pertinent. Then if there is that consensus, then together we have to deal in a very tough manner particularly those purveyors or perpetrators of violence. We should never be seen or giving any signal towards any sort of violent or excessive tendencies. But mind you, I must also caution, because what is termed as Islamophobia is also a reality. This crazy idea that the moment you consider yourself a Muslim or anything Islamic, immediately they have this strong prejudicial stance or view negatively. So I think there need to be this sort of engagement. I'm always called. I was in Tunisia just 2 weeks ago on the invitation of Rashid Ghannouchi, the leader of Nahda, the called Islamic Party. They call themselves Renaissance Party. And it's interesting. Here comes a person associated as Islamic rule or Islamic Party, asking me to have a dialogue with the 60 MPs on the path towards moderation, respecting the constitution, rights to minorities, gender equality, rule of law, market economy with distributive justice, which I think is very thrilling. Of course, those cynical voices would say, look, Anwar, this is a danger, one person, one vote, one time. They may hijack democracy towards the end. My answer would be constitutional guarantees. I don't care whether it's Islamic or secular or whatever party, but constitutional guarantees must be made clear so that you draw the line. Now, in the evening, I met half the cabinet members because they were crafting this new constitution. Now, if this seems to be the attitude, I'm more encouraged. But it is our duty. I mean, a country like India, you must continue to engage. You have a major role. But why is it that India completely refrained itself from engaging this dialogue? We resent the moment the United States members send feelers. But then we do nothing. I mean, I don't think the United States should have whole monopoly of the issue of democracy, because I think there are things that we should not learn from their political experience of K Street and the institutionalized corruption which is prevalent. But we have to allow them to engage, as we have also to continue to engage. I believe in engagement process. Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, various ethnic communities, and also various countries. And because you must accept the fact that there's a growing trend in the Muslim world, the failure of capitalism and socialism, the failure of dictatorial rule as secular establishments for decades. Now they resort to faith and ethical or religious values. Allow them this, to undergo this sort of process, but continue to engage, because a failure will be disastrous, not only for them, but maybe to the rest of the world.
You're talking of engagement. Mr. Ghare Khan was the official person authorized to engage. He no longer is. Next question, please. Yeah. Short. I don't think we have much time left. Please keep it very short. I'd like to take at least 2 more if I can.
My name is Om Pathak. My question is about what does democracy mean? Does it mean voting? Or does it mean universal franchise? Or does it go beyond that? I think political democracy without economic freedom is meaningless. It is then the democracy only for the classes. The rest of them don't have a right. So what is the kind of a democracy that we are transitioning to?
You've given the answer, because actually it is not, democracy is just not about elections. Jefferson cautioned us against the tyranny of the majority. It's not something new. It's not so. It's all about empowerment, political, economic, and cultural. It's about strengthening the institutions of governance, because otherwise the whole focus and concentration is how to win elections by hook and by crook, and most likely by crook, that means. You see? Deceit, cheat, and all sort of empty promises. And then, once you attain power, is enriching your family members and your cronies. And allowing for, I mean, the whole, there's no empowerment. Democracy is about empowering people. I'm not for me to say, I mean, in Indian society, but rereading Gandhi or Sri Aurobindo or Jinnah, I mean, the entire debate and discourse in Indian politics, particularly the original Congress, I don't want to talk about the present Congress, has been phenomenal in terms of political understanding of societies. It is very powerful. I mean, I'm just a student. There are many experts here. But I'm not saying this because I'm in India. I do take a lot of pain in Malaysia to promote the views, vision, and ideals of Gandhi. As a Muslim, I don't have problems with that at all. I mean, economy. In the world is enough for every man's need, not sufficient for every man's greed. Politics or democracy, not to be subjected to the whims and fancies of the few and use it to oppress the majority. I mean, all these constant reminders, I think we have to reread. I was in Pakistan just last month and asked them to listen, to reread or to be reminded, not only some of the verses of Iqbal, but also Jinnah in his Constituent Assembly speech of 1947. Well, Pakistan, they can call it secularic revolution, whatever, because it continues to be a secular. But what is important is his reminder about, one, cancer of corruption. Number two, reminding that the army must return to the barracks. The only problem is that you have a barrack in every street in Pakistan.
No. That, I'm afraid, will be the last question, but one. There's one from the net. So briefly, please.
Yeah. Do you think that countries like Singapore that offer a model that is a perfect trade-off between democracy and good governance, is there a danger of countries like Malaysia and Indonesia following that model because they have been so successful, and in particular Singapore and China?
Very sensitive questions. The Malaysians hate it when you praise Singapore. It's just not as bad as India, Pakistan. I was, I was in Karachi with the Management Institute of Pakistan, huge gathering. And then I said, what's wrong with us? Look at India. It's the same culture, same people, etc., etc. They're doing phenomenal growth. And they were very quiet, they were stunned. They thought I was quite crazy. Now, same, I mean, Excellency, the High Commissioner is here. No, but Singapore, you have to give credit that in terms of governance, in terms of anti-corruption drive, in terms of efficiency and no nonsense, it is, I mean, something you can emulate. Public housing programs, educational standards. But could they go a bit to the extreme? No chewing gum, and I don't understand why. They've withdrawn that, by the way. We used to even, when I was a student leader, we had demonstrations because there were Malaysians found in Singapore and forced to have a haircut. See, what the heck are these guys to do with hair? And all of us preferred to keep long hair those days. Now we don't have a choice, like MJ Akbar. Now, no. So there are things we emulate. But as I said, even in Singapore, economic growth, efficient government is not enough. There's now a growing call for political reform. We want to have our say. We are not saying that we elect you as our experts in every single field. And to get into the credit of the Singapore leaders, they are making some adjustments, slow but steady. So if you ask me, should we, I mean, yes, some areas, but not in terms of democracy or freedom. I think we should be, in that sense, of course, we can emulate Indonesia. Because Indonesia has a free media. I mean, actually certainly a vibrant democracy. There are problems, of course, economic reforms, slowly, too slow, and the issue of disparity between the very rich and the poor, marginalization of societies, that they have to grapple with. So I think for Malaysia, yes, we had a head start in terms of economic development, better infrastructure, but we have destroyed the institutions of governance in terms of judicial independence, media freedom, and we are grappled with a huge problem of endemic corruption, but very subtle. I always compare this to Malaysia and Indonesia. Indonesia under the Dutch, Malaysia under the British. The Dutch will send army and fight you head on. The British, we call it gunboat diplomacy. Very subtle, very sophisticated. You don't give money directly, you send it to Swiss accounts. So I don't believe that we should ever consider emulating in terms of political or issues of governance China. Yes, they have done remarkably well in terms of economic reform, but in terms of political agenda, political reform, India is still the country that the Asians must look to.
I would have loved to end on that happy note, but we must take a question because it is from Bihar. And therefore, implicitly and explicitly, it also has to be intelligent. So it's from Satyendra in Patna, come on email. I'll read it as it is. Malaysia has a strong tradition of popular democratic leaders ending up wielding dictatorial powers. Strictly on that aspect, has democracy been reduced to a sham in your country?
Well, although the Constitution made strong reference to democratic tradition, Malaysia has never been a truly vibrant democracy. Even when I was in government, I cannot absolve myself because I was seen to be a reformer trying to reform the system, not too successful. But it's gotten worse because there is no space at all in the media. All print and electronic media must be licensed by the government, which means you cannot own a TV station if you are not from the ruling establishment or committed to support the ruling party. But the situation is certainly not hopeless. There is growing support for multi-religious groups. The government, of course, choose to use the race card because you start having democratic reforms, then the ethnic Chinese, ethnic Indians would have more say, and therefore it would affect the position, the supremacy of the ethnic Malays. We don't share that view because, firstly, after half a century of independence, we are citizens. Nobody questioned the fact that Malay is the official language or Islam the official religion, but you have to accept the fact that you have to acknowledge the rights of all communities in their religious belief, in their cultural belief, and therefore we will have to accept these new realities. And we hope and pray that in the next elections we shall see the Malaysian spring, not from the streets, but from the electoral process. I remain optimistic, and hopefully we can be part of this new Asia that is democratic and economically vibrant. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.